With The Spy Who Loved Me, Bond proved to the world that nobody does it better, because it was a huge financial success and it received praise among audiences, fans and critics. At the end of the movie, the filmmakers made the promise that Bond would return in For Your Eyes Only, but they got rid of that idea and it had everything to do with a new franchise. When George Lucas's Star Wars hit the theaters in 1977, people were blown away by the revolutionary special effects. Lots of people were now hooked to sci-fi. With that in mind, the filmmakers shelved For Your Eyes Only in favor for Moonraker, an adventure that would have Bond go into the depths of space.
Cubby, this Bond film is costing, I believe, $25 million, about £12.5 million. They're getting more expensive all the time. Doesn't that worry you?
I wish it did come in at 25 million.
It'll be more.
Well, it's frightening, but these things cost more these days. When you come to this type of a location, you can imagine, with all of our eating technicians from Great Britain and France and Brazil, it's a costly operation.
For the 11th Bond adventure, the filmmakers had a budget of $34 million, which was an outrageous amount of money for the time, more than double the budget of The Spy Who Loved Me. They wanted to pull all the stops and make sure this was going to be the biggest, over-the-top, larger-than-life Bond film ever. And you could argue that they definitely succeeded with that one. Once again, the screenplay would have little to do with the original novel, apart from some characters and small story elements.
Before, when he wrote Moonraker, it was a little piddling rocket that went up to destroy London. Now, people have gone to the moon and gone all over the universe. And it's much more scientific, it's much more difficult, and much more advanced.
The film would be shot in various exotic locations all over the world, and the stage work would this time all be shot in studios in France. The Pinewood studios in England would only be used for all the models, special effects and miniature work that the film required. Lewis Gilbert, who directed the previous film and You Only Live Twice, returned, and once again the plot would share some similarities with his other two films. Where all the other Bonds end, this one begins. So let's have a look at Bond's only space adventure, or, well, at least to this date. It starts off with a 747 transporting a Moonraker space shuttle to the UK. The crew is just having some random chit-chats, and aboard of the Moonraker shuttle, two hijackers appear, strap themselves up and just take off. And immediately I've got a lot of questions here. It just takes off horizontally. Space shuttles can't do that, right? Especially since it only uses the length of a freaking plane to take off. And besides, why would there be fuel in the space shuttle when it's being transported? And what if it didn't get stolen? What the hell would the UK need a space shuttle for? They don't even have a space program. But yeah, I know I'm asking a lot of questions this early on in the movie, and with Bond films, especially the Roger Moore ones, you're gonna have to suspend some disbelief if you're willing to accept everything they throw at you, especially with this movie. Anyway, things get pretty similar to The Spy Who Loved Me already. M is informed that the Moonraker is stolen and he'll get his best agent on the job.
Moneypenny, is 007 back from that African job?
He's on his last leg, sir.
So meanwhile, 007 is finishing up another mission in a private jet with a random chick, who is revealed to be a baddie, and some other bad guy with a parachute appears and Bond starts fighting him and throws him out of the plane. Way to go, Bond, throwing a guy with a parachute out of the plane. That'll show him. But then Bond gets pushed out of the plane by Jaws. Yeah, everyone, Jaws is back, because we did see he survived the Atlantis destruction at the end of The Spy Who Loved Me, making him the only henchman to date to appear in 2 consecutive Bond films. He was brought back by popular demand, and, well, rightly so. But yes, Bond is on a free fall without a parachute, and Jaws jumps after him for whatever reason. And things get pretty badass as Bond glides his way over to the guy with the parachute and steals it from him, and Jaws joins in on all the madness. And sure, the stunt doubles are ridiculously obvious, especially the one doubling for Jaws, but the scene itself holds up really well. The only thing I don't like about it is the cartoony stuff. You know, Jaws breaks his parachute cord and lands on a circus tent, which he of course survives, but at least this lets us know that we're in for a really cartoony Bond adventure, arguably the most cartoony one yet. But I have to admit, I do hold a soft spot for this pre-title sequence, because Moonraker happens to be the first Bond film I ever saw. When I was a kid, it aired on TV, and I remember thinking the whole free fall with the Bond theme playing in the background was just really badass. I'm not sure exactly how old I was at the time, but I do remember also being fascinated by the silhouetted nipples in the opening titles, so I must have been at least older than 9. By the way, the title song is done for the 3rd time by veteran Bond singer Shirley Bassey.
Just like the moonraker goes in search of his dream of gold.
After the opening titles, Bond reports at MI6, and at this point Moneypenny is really starting to become the good old granny with a typewriter. I don't mean to pick on Lois Maxwell or anything, but it's just that at this point, she's not exactly the fun and flirty secretary she used to be anymore. She's just there to comment on Bond and laugh at him. Anyway, Bond talks to M, who is joined by Q and the Minister of Defense, who returns from The Spy Who Loved Me, and the mission is simple. The Moonraker shuttle has been stolen and Bond needs to go to the Moonraker manufacturer Hugo Drax from Drax Industries in California to learn more. Of course, he receives a gadget from Q, a wrist dart gun with steel-tipped and cyanide-coated darts. So Bond arrives at Drax Industries in California and is picked up by Drax's pilot Corinne, who gives Bond a tour of the complex. And we basically learn that Drax is loaded with cash.
Why didn't he buy the Eiffel Tower as well?
He did, but the French government refused him an export permit.
Of course, we are also introduced to Hugo Drax himself, played by Michael Lonsdale, and I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say he's the main villain of the movie. I mean, just look at him, and for crying out loud, he has a random samurai dude as a henchman.
Look after Mr. Bond. See that some harm comes to him.
So Bond gets to take a look around in the complex and is instructed to meet up with Dr. Goodhead.
Yes, my name is Bond. James Bond. I'm looking for Dr. Goodhead.
You just found her.
A woman?
Your powers of observation do you credit, Mr. Bond.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Miss Goodhead. I mean, I don't even need to explain that joke, right? I love it though. It's cheesy, but it's not something the kids would pick up. She is the main Bond girl of the film, played by Lois Chiles. She takes Bond to the centrifuge room to have a test ride, and Goodhead is called off, and random samurai dude takes over the controls and overrides the centrifuge, causing Bond to spin out of control and actually look like she's in serious trouble. And it's actually one of the best scenes in the film. It takes place on one of the many amazing Can-Am film sets of this movie, and Bond saves himself with the wrist dart gun, and Roger Moore for once doesn't go for the humor but plays it straight, which I like. And you can imagine Bond wondering which scientist did this to him and then going all, of course, random samurai dude. And then we move to nighttime, or well, a very darkened out state of daytime, and Bond is sneaking into Corinne's room and pretty much sexually molests her to extract information and converts her to his side using his favorite gadget in between his legs. Then after doing that, he sneaks into Drax's quarters and uses a safecracker to obtain some secret blueprints for glass vial, which is made in Venice. So Bond takes some pictures of those using a random tiny camera that has 007 written on it, which really makes Bond a freaking paradise. parody of himself. It's just ridiculous. But anyway, Corinne keeps this all a secret, but it turns out random samurai dude was spying on them all along. The next day, Bond joins Drax in some good old-fashioned pheasant shooting. There's a guy in a horn playing the 2001 A Space Odyssey theme, which doesn't annoy me as much as it annoys some people, but there's an assassin hidden in the trees ready to take Bond out, and Bond giving his pheasant shooting skills a shot.
You missed, Mr. Bond. Did I? Such good sport.
It's probably one of my favorite moments in the entire film. Yes, I know Bond uses a friggin' shotgun at a far range to kill the guy, but whatever, it always makes me smile. The humor is abruptly ended though, as Corinne is fired for being with Bond in Drax's quarters with the safe the other night, and we get this really dark scene out of nowhere where Corinne runs into the forest and random samurai dude releases the dogs that start chasing her. And for a Bond movie that is the most kid-friendly, cartoony and light-hearted, this moment is pretty scary and almost out of place. It's set in a misty forest and Corinne is scared out of her mind and runs for her life, and there's no Bond to save her out of this one. And then we move to Venice, where Bond checks out a store that produces the glass vials from which he retrieved the blueprints in the safe. He snoops around the glasswork factory and a museum with expensive glasswork that you know is all going to be destroyed later on, and he runs into Goodhead again, who is still acting uninterested in Bond. Of course, Bond also boards a gondola, and some random goons of Drax shows up, and one of them actually comes out of a coffin and starts throwing knives. So Bond switches to turbo gondola mode, and we get the most outlandish action scene filled to the bone with typical Roger Moore era tackiness, where gags are literally thrown at you every few seconds. Now don't get me wrong, I'm all for a few jokes in Bond films. I feel they should always be there. We get a guy thinking he's hallucinating when he spots the coffin in the water, and another gondola breaking into half with the romantic pair not even noticing it, but then Bond's gondola turns into a hovercraft and pretty much the entire slapstick catalog is thrown at you. I mean, for God's sakes, it's like the filmmakers tried to make the Guinness Book of Records for making the most gags in under a minute. I admit, I loved it in The Spy Who Loved Me when Bond drives out of the ocean and casually cruises onto the beach in his Lotus Esprit, throwing out a fist. It was pushing it a little bit, but the way they pulled it off was just pure class. But with this scene, class is not among the first words that spring to mind. More something along the lines of sheer ridiculous tacky stupidity. Any last sign of depth or authenticity of the original spy thrillers the franchise started out with are completely blown out of the window here. Oh, and I can't be expected to do my Moonraker episode without mentioning the infamous double-taking pigeon, which is exactly what it sounds like. Literally just some stock footage of a pigeon which is sped up and rewinded to make it seem that it does a double take, reacting to all the absolute horrendous nonsense happening before its eyes. After the dust settles, Bond sneaks into a laboratory that Drax apparently also has in Venice, and he learns that the scientists are developing a highly deadly nerve gas that kills them by accident but that has no effect on animals. So Bond takes one of the glass vials containing this nerve gas, and when he goes back outside, random samurai dude appears out of nowhere. Of course, all the expensive glasswork and faces in the museum get completely splintered, but the highly lethal nerve gas in the fragile glass vial in Bond's pocket gets no scratch. The fight itself is very average. It ends on top of a clock tower where Bond discovers all kinds of boxes from Drax Industries are stashed there to go out to Rio de Janeiro. And since the movie hasn't made a joke for almost a good minute at this point, we get the mandatory gag of having an opera singer right there in the area and having random samurai dude just being dropped down into the piano.
Play it again, son.
And then Bond visits Holly Goodhead in her hotel, and he finds out that she has a poisoned pen, a diary that shoots darts, a radio purse, and Christine Dior perfume that's actually a flamethrower.
Standard CIA equipment.
Yeah, sure, this is exactly the kind of stuff Felix Leiter would carry around. But yes, so it's not Dr. Goodhead, but Agent Goodhead, and although the pair still doesn't fully trust each other, there is some playfulness in between the two, and I like that. She still lies to Bond about leaving Venice, even though her bags are already packed and she clearly is also leaving for Rio de Janeiro, but they do have sex. The next day, M and the Minister of Defense are actually brought into Venice so that Bond can show them Drax's laboratory where he retrieved the nerve gas. So he gives his two superiors some gas masks and they walk into the lab, only to find out that the lab is completely gone and only Drax is there.
Frederick Gray, what a surprise. And in distinguished company, all wearing gas masks. Must excuse me, gentlemen, not being English. I sometimes find your sense of humor rather difficult to follow.
It's a nice little moment here that has the villain make a fool out of Bond for a change, but I never really understood why Bond just didn't show the nerve gas before going into the lab, because now the Minister of Defense is so pissed off at Bond that he wants him removed from the job, and Bond shows the nerve gas to M afterwards anyway. But oh well, M gives Bond permission to go on some unofficial leave so that he can continue his mission in Rio. And meanwhile Drax calls with some random henchman hotline to find a replacement for a random samurai dude, so he calls in Jaws. Ah yes, the return of the beast, I can't wait to see what's in store for him. So Bond arrives in Rio de Janeiro, sporting a great white suit as he arrives in his hotel to meet up with his contact, Manuela, who is very forgettable, but hey, she's hot, who cares. They go to a Brazilian carnival festival and Bond snoops around some warehouse where Manuela waits outside, and then Jaws appears wearing a scary clown outfit. As if this guy isn't scary enough on its own. But not much spectacular stuff actually happens. Jaws tries to kill Manuela, but some random carnival crowd people show up and Jaws pretends he's dancing with her even though he's just holding her and she's crying out for help. But hey, those people are drunk, why should they care? When Bond comes in to save her, we are expecting a big showdown between Jaws and Bond, but more drunk people appear and they just tag Jaws along, and the plot only really advanced a little bit with Bond finding out that Drax has an air freight business in Rio. Okay then, Bond does some investigating on top of the mountain in Rio, where he finds out that Drax is moving out of Rio too, and he runs into Goodhead for the third time, when they finally decide to team up. As the pair go back down with the cable car, Jaws appears again and freaking bites the cable car ropes down and makes his way over to fight Bond. So this time we do get a fight between Jaws and Bond, and it's pretty average, but the cinematography in this scene makes up for it so much. It's all shot beautifully. The Blu-ray version of this movie is just pure eye candy, and Bond and Goodhead trap Jaws in the cable car and manage to make their escape, while Jaws is left to crash the cable car into the building, and then we get this moment. It's the biggest what the fuck moment of the movie for me. And no, I did not edit in the stereotypical love music for this scene, it's edited in the actual movie. Jaws was a ruthless, scary killing machine in The Spy Who Loved Me. You literally were at the top of your seat every time he reappeared and made another kill with his lethal metal teeth. And now he's reduced to this. Sure, he had cartoony moments in The Spy Who Loved Me too, but come on, imagine if Oddjob was given a Korean girlfriend named Handjob. Why do this? What the hell were they thinking? Anyway, Goodhead and Bond are just making out and some paramedics show up who turn out to be more goons working for Drax, and they capture them and take them into an ambulance. And I never got why Bond and Goodhead try so desperately to escape here. They both found out that Drax is leaving his air freight business in Rio and they have no leads or clue where the hell he is now, so why try to escape? I mean, these goons are probably gonna take them directly to Drax, or at least some complex of his, but hey, I'm not a spy. guy, what do I know? By the way, this movie is often critiqued for having a license to sell. There's product placement and gigantic billboards with advertisement literally everywhere in this movie. I mean, it does get really annoying. But yes, Bond does manage to escape the ambulance and he makes his way over to another one of those covert MI6 bases, which seem to become as stable at this point in the franchise. Like seriously, Bond has visited one of these for 3 movies in a row now. There's some standard stuff of Q working on more gadgets and Moneypenny mainly just laughing and commenting on Bond, and M is also there, and before he was all like, "You better take 2 weeks of absence, 007. 007. No slip-ups, or we're both in trouble. You're on your own." And now he's all like, "Oh, 007, I'm here to aid you on your mission." But anyway, Q tells Bond that the nerve gas he retrieved in Venice comes from a rare plant, the Orchid indigenous from the Amazon jungle, and that is what advances the plot, so Bond is sent out there because the plant that made the toxin came from that area. So what? Do you know how big the Amazon is? How on earth would he find anything there? You know how much hours it would take him to... Oh, Drax's goons already spotted him. I mean, the plot is just so loosely stitched together at this point. But yeah, more action kicks in, and it's not as bad as the action scene in Venice, because there are some fun parts here where Bond uses some mines from his gadget boat to take out all the goons, and he uses a homing torpedo, which is pretty cool. Of course, Jaws jumps in out of nowhere again, and we get back into Looney Tunes mode. There's a waterfall at the end, and Bond just casually escapes using a hang glider that appears out of his boat, and Jaws is left breaking the steering wheel and falls down, and he obviously survives, and Bond just happens to land nearby Drax's secret lair as he follows some beautiful girls inside. But the interior set is once again an inspiring one by Ken Adam, and there are a dozen of hot girls there, and that's pretty classic. And Bond thinks that the bridge is a trap, so he stands on a rock, which turns out to be the real trap, and he falls into the water, and he's left fighting a python, or whatever it is, a boa constrictor? Anyway, it's a really gigantic snake, that's all you really need to know, and it's not as exciting as it really might sound, because Bond kills it easily using the poisoned pen he got from Goodhead. Drax appears too, and Bond is taken to another great film set, which is inspired by the Mondrian paintings, and Drax's dastardly plan is revealed here. He wants to destroy the human race using the toxic nerve gas developed from the plant, and then repopulate the Earth with the perfect species. A Noah's Ark operation. So from this base, several Moonraker shuttles are launched into space, and the one that got stolen in the beginning of the movie is actually stolen back by Drax himself, because one of his own Moonrakers developed a technical fault, so he needed this one back. It's just another thing that's so loosely stitched together. And Goodhead is taken hostage at this base. See, I told you, Bond should have just stayed in the ambulance before. They both ended up here anyway. The pair is placed directly under one of the Moonrakers that is about to lift off, but of course they make a narrow escape because Bond just happens to have a watch capable of destroying metal bars, and shortly after that Bond and Goodhead sneak into one of the Moonrakers themselves, and they finally make their way into space. And yes, it's completely outlandish for a secret agent to go into space and all that, but everybody watching Moonraker knows going in that this part is coming up, and honestly, at this point of the movie, I'm glad they finally make their way into space. And a lot of this is actually better than all the crap that happened before. The moment where Drax's space station is revealed is still really impressive. And it's here where I think Moonraker does deserve some praise, and it mainly comes down to Derek Mennings, a special effects designer who worked on the Thunderbird series, making him a childhood hero of mine, with his amazing models and miniature work and outstanding visual effects, and production designer Ken Adam with his amazing film sets. The interior space station set is just another one of his brilliant creations, and Ken Adam passed away very recently, so this is his last Bond film that he worked on, and now is as good as ever to mention his brilliant work. Aboard of the space station, Drax has a great little speech.
First, there was a dream. Now, there is reality. Their first day on Earth, they will be able to look up and know that there is law and order in the heavens.
I mean, Drax to me is just an okay villain, but his dialogue is usually pretty cool, and he is a memorable villain. So all kinds of globes with the nerve gas capable of destroying millions of people are fired to the earth, and meanwhile Bond and Goodhead disable the radar jamming system so that the space station becomes visible from Earth. And there's also a nice little moment where the head of the KGB, General Gogol, reappears from The Spy Who Loved Me, discussing the space station with NASA. So the Americans sent a space shuttle up to investigate the space station, and that leads into a gigantic space battle where everything just goes overboard, and it shows you just how far the series have gotten up until this point. It's just weird to think that the series went from serious spy thrillers adventures to this. Again though, there are some nice special effects with all the wire work and such when there is no gravity, and I'm not even holding Bond going into space against this movie, but it just goes all berserk. And Jaws, by the way, switches sides and now aids Bond on his mission when he finds out that Drax wants to make a perfect physical species and he doesn't meet the requirements. Eventually there's a showdown between Drax and Bond, and Drax is about to shoot Bond, but Bond uses his wrist gun to fire a cyanide dart onto him.
Take a giant step for mankind.
It's a pretty cool villain, that actually, but because of the full-on space war between the American astronauts and Drax's goons, the whole space station is about to explode, so Bond and Goodhead have to make their way back into the Moonraker shuttle, and it can't disengage, so Jaws and his girlfriend help them out. Yes, she's also there, by the way.
Well, here's to us.
Jaws can talk? What the hell? Imagine if our job would all of the you know what, never mind. The space station explodes and even Jaws couldn't have survived that one, right?
Colonel Scott reports picking up 2 survivors from the space station. A tall man and a short blonde woman.
Man, this guy just lives through everything, doesn't he? Of course Bond and Goodhead are still left to save the world, as those globes with the nerve gas still need to be destroyed. So we get a scene in which Bond has to destroy them all with a laser, which becomes a little bit exciting, but of course soon the world is saved. And back on Earth we get a fun little scene where M, Q and the Minister of Defense are all waiting to talk to Bond.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
And Q's line really makes the joke work, and that always leaves me smiling, and so does this moment.
Take me around the world one more time.
Why not?
It's the inevitable cheesy ending that we're used to by now, but I think it's one of the better endings in the series. Usually when a Bond film is outlandish and over the top, it's either done extremely right, like The Spy Who Loved Me, or goes into campy absurdity, like Diamonds Are Forever. And there's no denying that Moonraker comes into the territory of outlandish campiness and absurdity too. It's a full-on kids movie that is removed far from anything Bond ever was. Jaws falls in love, all the crap with the gondolas in Venice, the space laser battle, a spy camera with Bond's 00 number on it, the overload of cartoony humor. It's just not a good movie, and Bond has pretty much become a parody of itself with this film. However, and yes, there is an however, to me it's slightly redeemed by its spectacle. Moonraker was a pretty grand and big movie. It's easy to see that the big budget went onto the screen. It's filled up with beautiful cinematography, excellent and inspiring Can-Am film sets that just seem to pop on one after another, and special effects and models and miniature work that all deserve some praise too. I also really like the pre-title sequences Free Fall, and the moments at the ending are pretty darn entertaining. Holly Goodhead was a decent Bond girl that honestly does a better acting job than Barbara Bach did in the previous movie. And at least it's a very memorable film, whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. So I wouldn't say it's the worst Bond film in the series. In fact, I personally don't even think it's the worst Roger Moore film. I still rank it in my bottom half Bond films, sure, but to sum it up, I would say Moonraker is an outlandish, over-the-top Bond film with cartoony humor that does deserve some applauding for its production design and special effects.